Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar featuring our presenter, John Laffey from PJR. We're also joined by Dejan here from Advisera. Please note that all attendees are going to be muted throughout the duration of today's webinar. If you have any questions for the presenter or for PJR, we encourage you to use the designated question tab within your GoToWebinar control panel. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to John and we can get started. Thank you for joining us.
Hey, thank you very much. Thank you all for joining us. As you can see here today, we're going to be talking about third-party certification and accreditation and what that means in terms of your certification. And with me again is Dejan Kosutic. And Dejan, I'll go ahead and let you introduce yourself and give a little background on you.
Yeah, thanks for John for inviting me and having me in the webinar. So my name is Dejan Kosutic. I'm the CEO and the lead expert on ISO 27001. Yeah, so I'm really glad to participate here and to share my opinion and some of my experiences with certification.
Awesome, thank you. And I'm John Laffey. I am the ISMS program manager at Perry Johnson Registrars, and I've also been a lead auditor for ISO 27001, going on 8 years now. So let's go ahead and get into it. All right, so it's going to be a shorter webinar today, but I wanted to talk about what accreditation is and what it means for certification. Go over some expectations for accredited certification body audits, and then talk about the benefits of using an accredited certification body as opposed to an unaccredited certification body. All right, so let's talk about accreditation. So there are accreditation bodies for management systems all over the world, and basically what they do is they not certify but accredit auditing and assessment companies, certification bodies like Perry Johnson, to basically give more confidence that the processes we have in place, the people that we have in place, are effective and meet a set of requirements. Much like ISO 27001 has a number of requirements, there are standards specific for certification bodies. An example of these for management system certification body like Perry Johnson would be ISO 17021. Additionally, for certification bodies that do information security management system auditing, there is a standard called ISO 27006. And in those standards, it looks very much like ISO standards you may have seen. It lays out a number of requirements. And what being accredited means is that much like our clients that we certify get audited by us on an annual basis, we get audited by our accreditation bodies on an annual basis. So, we get to sit on the other side of the table. They come in and they, ask questions, need to see evidence, and we need to demonstrate that we're meeting all of these requirements. And just like when we conduct certification audits, there can be findings, there could be nonconformities found, and obviously certification bodies need to get those corrected effectively in order to maintain their accreditation. So really you can think of it very much the same as being certified. Annual assessments, findings needing to be remediated. It's the same process for us as a certification body with our accreditation bodies auditing us. Additionally, a lot of the requirements in those standards that I mentioned impact the audits that we give to our clients. Things such as auditor competency and experience, the amount of time we need to have for a given audit, certain elements of audit reports and audit plans, even the way the actual certificate looks. A lot of that stuff is driven and dictated by the requirements in those standards. And a big point of emphasis during accreditation body audits is looking at requirements, as I mentioned, around competency. They're very thorough in wanting to be confident that the folks we have conducting our audits are competent to do so, as well as the other people involved in the certification process. So the people who review packages, the people who actually issue the certs. You know, we're all grilled on an annual basis to make sure that we know what we're doing. Additionally, impartiality is obviously something huge. They want to make sure that we're conducting impartial audits. Obviously, that's a foundation of the audit process. So they're always looking at that. And then they look at the overall effectiveness of our audit process. You know, and that involves reviewing audit packages for audits that we've conducted, interviewing the auditors and the people who reviewed those packages, looking at the certificate itself. You know, basically every aspect of the certificate and the audit is looked at from tip to tail, and they make sure that we have all our I's dotted and T's crossed. So yeah, that's kind of in a nutshell what it means to be accredited as a certification body. Basically, there's an independent organization that is assessing us on a regular basis and saying, yes, you know, you do meet the requirements and you are competent and capable to conduct these audits. Dejan, I know this isn't really in your wheelhouse, but I didn't know if you had anything you wanted to add around that.
Yeah, maybe just to clarify for the attendees, so who are actually these accreditation bodies? I mean, how did they actually become into this business of becoming accreditation bodies? Yeah,
so as I mentioned, there's accreditation bodies all over the world. Some examples include UKAS in the UK, who accredits us for our 27001 program. ANAB is in the United States here. They're a big one. Accredia in Italy is another accreditation body. And basically accreditation bodies exist to certify, you know, either management system auditors, or I'm sorry, certification bodies like us. It could be people who certify personnel, but they basically exist to state that the companies who are doing these certifications are competent to do so and are doing it in an effective manner.
Yeah, if I understood well, there is usually only one or maybe only a few accreditation bodies per each country. So I think in UK, there is only one, a UKAS, right? So it's not like there are many of these accreditation bodies, usually only one per country.
Correct. And additionally, there is a group called the IAF that's basically a federation of these accreditation bodies all over the world. Many of the accreditation bodies are signatories. And what the IAF does is kind of provides additional guidance and rules around the way accreditation bodies, you know, accredit their certification bodies. And it's in order to provide clarity in some instances, but overall just to provide more consistency, you know, from country to country and accreditation body to accreditation body to give a more consistent and, you know, product that clients can have confidence in, I would say.
Yep. And if I understood well, accreditation body to become one needs to get basically a license from the government, right? It usually works like this. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So how do these accreditation audits look like? I mean, are they stricter than what you do with your clients when you do certification? So can you compare them in terms of how strict they are?
Yeah, no, I honestly feel like they're very similar. I might say depends on who your assessor is, right? Even though it shouldn't, much like the auditor that you have at your certification, they might look at different things in a different auditor. But overall, it feels very similar to the audits that we give. You know, the requirements are documented in the standard, so everybody knows what the criteria is. They'll go through those requirements. They'll ask us, okay, how are you meeting this? You know, do you have a procedure or a policy, something you can show? Okay, yep, you have it there. This is what you say you're doing. Now, can you please show me some evidence of you actually doing that? And they'll pull samples to verify that, you know, we're doing what we say we do. So it's a very similar process to the audits that we give.
Okay, it's interesting, yeah. And do the accreditation bodies really look into the certifications that you've done? I mean, do they actually examine the companies that you are certified, or this is more like a top level audit without going into each audit client that you have?
So no, when they pull samples, they'll absolutely look at everything from the way we calculated audit time, the application, you know, the certificate itself. They'll verify that the dates on the cert are are valid. They'll verify the scope, right? They might look at the company's website just to do a sanity check to, okay, this is what their scope says they do. Does this make sense? They will never contact our clients. It's very much focused on what we're doing. So they'll look at our audit reports. They're going to want to see, specific objective evidence, that indicates that a thorough audit was conducted. And as they go through the audit package, obviously there's requirements and those standards that I talked about that we're held to. They're going to want to make sure those items were captured and hit in the way that is specified in those standards. But they won't ever reach out directly, at least to my knowledge, to our clients. It's very much focused on how we do audits and how we conduct our certification activities.
Okay, good to know. It's something that usually, when you're on this, let's say, side, when you're helping clients implement, you never actually know what happens behind the scenes, right? When you actually what these accreditation bodies do. So it's very interesting to hear this.
Yeah, I always like to tell clients about this because I think it makes them feel a little better that we have to go through the same thing. So we can empathize a little bit with the shoes they're in. All right.
Okay.
So accredited certification body audits. So basically, I wanted to highlight, some expectations and, when you go with an accredited certification body as opposed to an unaccredited certification body, what that means. The first thing I wanted to point out is that the staff who are responsible for calculating audit time, planning audits, performing audits, making certification decisions, they've all been found competent to do so by our accreditation body. You're going to have a knowledgeable audit team who will have experience planning and conducting certification audits. Once again, going back to those standards that the certification body is held to, they talk about the requirements for auditor competency. Typically, auditors will have had to have undergone a 40-hour class covering auditing fundamentals, as well as requirements and content specific to the standard that they're auditing. And those classes typically also have an exam that requires, them to pass that as well. And then additionally, after meeting those requirements, as well as any specific background, work experience, educational requirements, auditors have to undergo training audits. Typically, when they're first starting out, they'll just do an observation audit where they just sit in and kind of watch and get a feel for how it all works. Then they'll become a team member, supervised team member, and they'll get to do some auditing themselves, but obviously there's going to be a lead auditor there with them, just to keep them on the right track and answer any questions they may have. Depending on the standard, there's a different number of training audits that need to take place. And then additionally, I know at Perry Johnson, we also we fill out peer evaluation forms, right? So when we're mentoring a new auditor, we give them feedback and we document all this in records, things that went well, things that maybe they need to work on, and then we give a recommendation. Hey, do we think they're ready to become a lead auditor? Do they maybe need a little bit more time supervised, just to get some more seasoning? But all that means that basically the auditors that you're going to see as a client are going to be folks who've done this before. They're qualified to do it. They have the required background. They have gone through the training. They're competent and they've been found effective at conducting audits. Another big point for accredited certification bodies, something that's driven home a lot at Perry Johnson, is the importance of impartiality, right? You need to be fair and even keeled and not have any bias. We always I have to attest on a document that I have not worked for or consulted the client that I'm going to audit for the past 2 years. So you can have confidence, again, that the auditor that's going to come on site to do your certification audit from an accredited certification body is going to be impartial. Another fun part of being accredited, something that I've gone through multiple times, is the accreditation body. In addition to the audit they do of the certification body, kind of the office audit, they also throughout the year do witness audits. So they'll pick one of our audits that we have throughout the year, and they'll say, we want to send our assessor, he's going to come sit in on the audit. They don't say anything, which is even tougher as an auditor because you don't know, but they witness the audit, right? They are evaluating the auditor, the way he conducts the audit, if the depth of his audit was appropriate, if he wrote findings when they were found, if he wrote them, if he classified them correctly, all that. So it's a really fun process for us as auditors to get witnessed by our accreditation body. But again, as a client of an accredited certification body, can give you more confidence that the folks that are conducting your audit, are doing it in the appropriate fashion. Additionally, accredited certification bodies, it's not the auditor. If I'm conducting your audit, I don't have the final say in yes, give them a certificate, or no, they don't get one. There's audit package review that takes place for all audits, where someone who's not the auditor but is qualified in the standard looks through the audit package, looks at any findings, looks at corrective action responses, looks at everything as a whole. Basically, as the auditor on my audit report, I make a recommendation, and then that has to go through the review process, and the executive committee member will either agree with it, or if they have questions or concerns, they'll reach out to the auditor and get everything straightened out. But it's not just the auditor who's making your certification decision. There's more than one person. Additionally, as an accredited certification body, you have to have a formal dispute process in place. So for whatever reason, at the end of an audit, if you and your auditor just didn't see eye to eye on something, you as a client would have recourse to go to the certification body to file a dispute, and then there'll be a independent third party who mediates it, hears all sides of the story, and then a decision is made. But again, it kind of insulates just having one person being in control of that, right? So I thought that was important to talk about as well. Sorry about that. Additionally, get back to my notes here. Accredited certification bodies will have. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, it's interesting actually that, but most people think that actually a certification auditor is the one to make a decision whether the company gets a certificate or not. Whereas it's not really that simple. It's he or she is only doing a part of the job, whereas the final decision really rests with someone else in the certification body, right?
Sure. I mean, and the auditor certainly has a huge role in it because they're the ones gathering all the evidence, right, making the recommendation. But having the review process in place is just an additional safeguard to make sure, that if something were to have gone wrong, if there was some personal, who knows what could happen on an audit, but it's just to ensure that audits are being done effectively and impartially. And, I guess if you look at it from one angle, if you had an auditor, right, who was responsible for actually handing the cert or not, it could put people in maybe a compromised position if someone, was really anxious to get a certificate. So it's good for a number of reasons, but it's not ultimately the lead auditor's decision. They make a recommendation, and then that goes through a review process where it's either approved, or hey, there's some issues here, we need to talk about this, maybe we need to talk to the client, whatever the case may be, but just to make sure that everything's on the up and up. Another thing, another aspect of using an accredited certification body is that they'll have formalized processes in place for conducting audits. They will also typically have standardized audit plan templates, report templates. So regardless of the auditor that you get from one year to the next, audits are going to be done in kind of a predictable manner, I would say. After you've gone through the certification process, you'll have a good feel for how your certification body is conducting audits, the types of information they're going to want to see, how, at that point you'll have an audit report, so you'll know, some specifics of what they'll be looking for. But it gives you as a client, I think it helps reduce some anxiety of, okay, what's going to happen this week, this year? It's going to be, like I said, it's a formalized process, standardized reports and templates typically. So you can get comfortable and familiar with the process. Yeah. So let's talk about benefits. Oh, go ahead, Dejan. Sorry.
Yeah, so there is very often a question, on how this impartiality is achieved when, let's say, a certification body could use someone who is actually acting as a consultant, as a third party, really, a contractor, really, as the auditor. Now, if this auditor is also working as a consultant, then how is this impartiality achieved? If I mean this same person is doing the certification audit. So how is this done in practice?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, it's strictly forbidden, right? Like, and this is something that comes up because people who consult pretty typically will also be auditors, and we have folks who audit for us who are consultants. But again, we have to, like I said, on every audit, I have to sign a form that attests that I have not consulted or worked for the company I am auditing in the past 2 years. Additionally, if it's somebody who maybe we think works, with clients in a particular sector, we know has connections with a client of ours, we might do some deeper digging, right, in the background to make sure that, there's nothing inappropriate happening there. Again, this is something that our accreditation bodies look at very closely, and it's obviously super important to the audit process, right? We don't want folks who consult and set up a company system to turn around and then certify it. Obviously, on a number of levels, it's not going to make for an effective audit, most likely.
Oh, it's very important, of course, to avoid this kind of a conflict of interest, and the more this is done thoroughly, the actually better the certification body is, right? It's also a sign of doing the job properly. And we also get very often a question on if someone passes the lead auditor course for, let's say, 27001, how do actually they become a certification auditor for a certification body? So what are the kind of the steps really to become one?
Yeah, so yeah, as I mentioned, and I'll just speak for Perry Johnson, obviously. Once we've identified a candidate, we've vetted out their background, we've ensured that they meet the competency and experience requirements. They then take the course. If they have taken a course, we look at their certificate, we verify and validate that. Then they start the training process, which was what I kind of mentioned before. They'll usually start as an observation. They'll just sit in on an audit to kind of get a feel for it. Then the next audit, they'll become a supervised team member, where they'll actually do some auditing, but the lead auditor will be with them to make sure that they're staying on track, they're asking the right types of questions, capturing the right kind of information, and then if the trainee has any questions, they're there to answer that. And I believe for 27001, previously, I want to say it was, I should know this, I believe it was like 20 audit days that they had to do in a supervised role, one of which was an initial audit. I think one had to be a recertification. They had a limit on how many days they could do for surveillance audits. So it was pretty rigorous requirement. I know for us, it was always something we were looking to tackle. They've recently changed it. They've revised 27006, which is the standard that certification bodies are held to for doing 27001 audits. I think they've reduced it a little bit, but it's a lot of training audits. It gives them a lot of opportunity to see different things, encounter different issues, ask questions, figure out how to work through different things, and ultimately leads to them being a lot more prepared when they go on their own to conduct these audits.
Yeah, it's very important that these people, the auditors are really trained and that they know what they're doing. So this is an important part of becoming one.
Absolutely. All right, well, I think we got one more slide here. Let's talk about the benefits of of having an accredited certification. Number one, I believe it gives your customers, potential customers, your partners, further assurance that you're effectively meeting the requirements of ISO 27001 or whatever standard it may be that you're certified to. As I mentioned earlier, accredited certification bodies are continuously assessed by their accreditation bodies to ensure that they continue to have effective processes and people in place to conduct audits, issue certificates, and maintain certification. I think having an accredited certificate allows you to kind of differentiate yourself from maybe other businesses or corporations in the sector. You know, being able to publicize your accredited certification, it gives you something tangible to demonstrate your capabilities. You know, and as a certified company, you're basically demonstrating that you're certified by an independent third party, right? Like you contracted an independent third party to come take a close look at everything you guys do, make sure it's meeting the requirements of the standard, and then ultimately saying, yes, they are, you know, meeting it and issuing the certificate. Well, an accredited certificate, that independent third party is accredited by an independent third party who looks at the certification body every year and their processes and, you know, the actual results of their audits, and is saying on a continuous basis, yes, these folks are doing things the right way, they're meeting the requirements of the standard, they have competent people in place, they have, you know, they demonstrate impartiality, all that stuff. So it's really just further assurance, because, Dejan, I know maybe you've seen this, but there are unaccredited certification bodies out there, and being unaccredited doesn't mean that they're not meeting all those requirements and doing things the right way, but there's nothing to look at to have confidence that they are, right? I don't know if you have any experience with that, but.
Yeah, I mean, you know, very often, sometimes we are asked, you know, by our clients, they're telling us, look, we found a very cheap certification body, like, which is kind of 3 times or 4 times cheaper than regular certification bodies, and they ask, okay, why is this so? And then we take a look at it and find out that these, well, certification bodies are not really accredited, right? They only say they're certification bodies, whereas there are ordinary companies, you know, issuing certificates without any background, any license, so to say, for doing so. So the point being here is that, you know, if you really want to have a certificate with a value, you need to do it with a accredited certification bodies. Otherwise, you know, this is only a piece of paper that means nothing.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and like I said, it doesn't mean they're not doing things the right way, but if it's an unaccredited certificate, maybe you just print it yourself. Probably not a ton of difference, because there's nothing to look at to have any confidence that the people who issued that certificate, you know what they're doing or are doing it the right way, or any of those things. So it definitely gives another layer of assurance that a certificate is meaningful. I think another benefit of being certified by an accredited certification body, you know, when you implement ISO 27001, it can be a big lift. Luckily, there's people like Dejan out there who can help you, but you know, it's going to mean additional work typically for your staff, right? They're going to have, you know, for people directly involved, they're going to have to write policies. They're going to have to implement maybe new controls. I mean, it could be any number of things, and I'm sure it's not always fun. And also it can just mean more burden and hurdles for staff in general to jump through. Maybe now they have to, not that it's a big deal, but people don't like to always have to, you know, use multi-factor authentication every 2 or 4 or 6 or 8 hours or whatever. You know, it can add more burden. So when you actually achieve certification, you get the certificate, I think that it's a great way to affirm that, hey guys, everything we work towards and that we've been doing, it paid off. We had an independent certification body come in here, and they said, we're meeting the requirements. So, you know, I think it can help, you know, build morale and give folks a sense of achievement that, okay, that all that stuff we did, it wasn't for nothing. And even to the point that, you know, an independent third party said, way to go, you guys are meeting the requirements. You know, I think it can be very helpful with that. And then lastly, sometimes having the accredited certificate can help you win work. I know we have a number of customers who do work for the federal government here in the United States. While it's not always a strict requirement, I know that preference is given, points are given to companies who have different certifications, ISO 27001 being one of them. When they bid on contracts, you know, it differentiates them. And then we have a number of clients who flat out, they had a customer or potential customer that said, yes, we want to work with you, but we need to see that you're certified to ISO 27001 first. And a lot of times those requirements will stipulate accredited for just the reasons we talked about, right? An unaccredited certificate, it's hard to have any confidence in what exactly that means. So in some cases, having an accredited certificate is going to help you keep work or get new work, get new clients. Yeah, that's pretty much all I had for this particular topic. So I'm curious to see if there's any questions, or Dejan, if you had anything else you wanted to add.
Yeah, so very often what we see in the market is that the companies are going for a certification because of the basically market requirements, right? So they have clients who, I mean, potential clients who tells them, look, we can work with you. I mean, we can buy our services or products, but we need you to be ISO 27000 certified. So very often this actually benefit of getting a new market is the main driver for getting for a certificate, which is a very good and a very valid, I would say, reasons to go for a certification. Also because actually it's then much easier to convince the senior management of the company actually to go for it, because very often the senior management is really reluctant to invest into security because they don't see a direct benefit. But if the benefit is here, actually, that you can actually get a new revenue because you do have the certificate, then it's I would say a win-win situation when you actually can convince the top management rather easily.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
When you mentioned this actually companies that have to invest and prepare for the certification, this is true. I mean, some companies really go for a certification without almost any preparation, and then they have problems and major non-conformities, all kinds of things. And yeah, for that purpose, it's really important that you take this job seriously. And actually, I'll send now a link to an article which explains all these implementation steps that you need to take. So it's if you click this link, you will see this article. Anyway, there are something like 15 or 16 steps that are needed actually to go through actually to prepare for the certification body and to avoid I would say any let's say problems at the certification. So preparation is very important, and going unprepared will only create embarrassment and additional costs.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that, Dejan. So I pulled up the questions here, and so far there's one, and it's an interesting question. Richard asks, who audits the accreditation bodies? And that's a great question, Richard. That's one that I've asked myself, and I'm not an expert on accreditation bodies. We get assessed by one annually. I've done some research, but to the best of my knowledge and what I was able to find out is that it sounds like the accreditation bodies, at least in like the IAF signatories, they basically peer audit each other. So, folks from one accreditation body will go out to another accreditation body and basically conduct an assessment. But great question, Richard.
Yeah. And in most countries, actually, especially European countries, these accreditation bodies are governmental organizations, right? So they're basically not private-owned; they're governments, simply government agencies. And then, therefore, actually, they need to comply with some specific rules for government organizations. Very often, there is a specific law which actually governs this type of activity. So, in other words, they actually are responsible to either directly to the government, or they have to comply with these specific laws or regulations for this specific activity. So this is basically how they are, if not audited, at least how they are supervised.
Gotcha. Good info. Thank you for that. But yeah, there's no other questions that I'm seeing right now. So if you have any, here we go. Let's see. Deborah's asking, when you don't agree with an audit finding and it goes to a third-party person to review, where does that third party come from? So the third party is typically an employee of the certification body. But I can just tell you personally from my experience and what I've seen, they're not tied. They have no, bias or interest in simply affirming what the auditor's finding was. It's a very open forum. All parties get to state their case and give their reasons and provide evidence, and then a decision's ultimately made. You know, I can just say for a certification body, you know, we wouldn't want to arbitrarily just take the side of an auditor and potentially alienate our clients, right? Like customer experience is important, and we want this to be beneficial. We certainly don't want folks feel like, you know, they're getting railroaded or anything like that. So, but yes, to answer your question, I know at least in our case, the individual who does the mediating is an employee of Perry Johnson.
Yeah.
Good question.
And just to add here, so it's important to understand that certification auditors are not, I would say, behaving based on their opinion. So it's not like if they like, you know, a security or don't like a security. It's not how it works. How it works is actually that they can raise, I mean, certification auditors can raise a nonconformity under two conditions. First one is that there is a clear requirement for a security thing, and the second that there is a clear evidence that the company did not comply. So one very simple example there. Okay, there is a clear requirement in 27001 that the company must have a statement of applicability, right? So the requirement is there. If the company did not write a statement of applicability, and then there is an evidence that, well, it's not there. So in this kind of a case, obviously the certification auditor will raise a non-conformity. But if there is no clear requirement, okay, or if there is no evidence, then the certification auditor cannot, you know, simply raise a non-conformity just out of the blue, right? So it's why these kind of misunderstandings very rarely happen, because auditors always act on these two premises, right? If there is a requirement and if there is an evidence, and if you have both of these things, you know, it's nothing actually to argue against because it's so clear that there is a non-conformity. There's nothing to argue with or about.
Absolutely, and that's a great point, Dejan. And that's actually something as part of that review process that I was talking about. You know, all the packages go through executive committee review. All findings are looked at, and we're specifically trying to see, okay, did they write the finding? Is it clear that there's objective evidence that a requirement wasn't met? And if it's not, then we go to the auditor and we get clarification on that. But yeah, if it were ever the case that a dispute came up over a finding and we looked at the finding and there was no objective evidence cited to support it, well, then they would most likely be thrown out because we have no confidence. You know, it looks like someone's opinion or feelings, right? Which is, as you mentioned, not something we audit against. But great question, and thank you, Dejan, for that insight. We got a couple more trickling in here. Joyce asks, or states, our certification body is accredited by ANAB and UKAS. Is it common to have multiple accreditations? I know this is something that we have as well in place for some of our standards. I think it's largely driven by the customer base. You know, if you're doing international business, I know that we've been growing in the UK a lot, but we actually went with UKAS for our 27001 accreditation because that's kind of the birthplace of the standard, if you will. I believe it arose from a BS standard, a British standard. So we just felt that would make the most sense to have them accredit our 27001 program. But yeah, it's not uncommon for certification bodies to have multiple accreditations, and I think it's largely driven by, you know, what their customers want to see. They have customers that want to see that UKAS seal. Then they may go out and pursue that accreditation for a given standard in order to satisfy that. Jeff asks, is there anything in the standard about the consideration of the environmental impact with interested parties? Great question, Jeff. So yes, there is. I believe this was a recent change across all the standards now, but they're wanting to make sure that as part of our audit process, even for information security, that we're talking with the client about their organization and potential environmental impacts that it may have. You know, just obviously in an effort to try and bring more awareness and conversation around, you know, the environment itself. Let's see, we have AO asking, I am certified 27001 lead auditor. Can I get a job? I will, let me send you, I'll give you my contact info and we can certainly have a conversation about that. Thank you. All right, not seeing anyone else here, so Dejan, unless you have anything else, I just want to thank everyone so much for joining. Dejan, obviously, pleasure to present with you again and have your insight. And yeah, I guess everyone have a great day. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, thanks, John, for giving me an insight. So I learned also something new today, which is always useful to know how certification bodies and accreditation bodies work. So it was a great webinar today. So thanks again for inviting me, and I hope that everyone has found this webinar useful today. Thanks again.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Yeah. Bye-bye.